For me, any form of social injustice is just wrong. Society should be a place where everybody is equal before the law, irrespective of your positioning, your status, your family, or your background.
All you have to do is check the comment sections on any story on social media to get an idea of the general consensus where LGBT people are concerned. People are too quick to suggest torture, imprisonment, and even death. And all these point to a very worrying conclusion that the majority of Nigerians are not just homophobic, but proudly so. My name is Aritopo, and on today's episode of Untold Facts, we will be looking at homophobia, about the cultural, societal, and religious issues that surround it, and see if we can get to a point where people are more accepting of people who are different from themselves.
Society should be a place where everybody is equal before the law, irrespective of your positioning, your status, your family, or your background.
Joining me today is Dami Ajayi. He is a doctor and a writer, and honestly, I have no idea how you can do those two things together. But man, kudos, because I have no idea. It's good to have you on.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's talk about homophobia. How would you define it?
In my own words, I would say homophobia, using my knowledge from science of phobia. Phobia generally means irrational fear. So homophobia is probably best defined as an irrational fear, an abnormal, persistent, irrational fear of homosexuals, or generally, homosexuals. So that's the easiest way to define it. But of course, if you're going to dilate that, you would look beyond just the fear. You would ask yourself how the fear comes about.
Yes.
You ask about why are people generally afraid of this people, and why do they, have this kind of feelings, psychological, emotional, towards them. And generally, you would find out that this probably comes from their own thoughts and beliefs about this set of people. So generally, I'm
actually very excited about us breaking down these thoughts and beliefs. But there's something I've always wondered. People believe that if I'm not suggesting death and torture to a gay person, I'm not a homophobe. But I believe that homophobia can be expressed in different ways. And sometimes it is not always aggressive, but it's still there, don't you think?
Okay, maybe you mean something like microaggression, like, like in context of racism, more like.
Yes.
Generally, I would say that, homophobia, just like many things that pertains to human beings, exist on the spectrum.
Yes.
So on the one hand, you have the mild homophobia, which is just avoidance. I don't want to associate myself with you. To the severe, which is generally aggression. Physical aggression, verbal aggression, and even a certain kind of predatory desire to maybe even hurt or maim the person. Yeah. So I think it occurs on that spectrum. And then of course we also have to talk about what the mob can do. Generally, when people of a certain group and a certain belief are together, there's a reinforcement of that belief.
Yes.
And then in that space there is no individuality anymore. There's the mob, and the mob is such a powerful canopy under which people can
suspend
and
good things, or suspend, there's a word I'm looking for, suspend morals.
Propriety and morals.
Suspend the right,
and they just become savage or savages. Yeah, so I think that's really what obtains here.
I hear this a lot, and I'd love to hear your opinion. We hear a lot that people who are very aggressively homophobic are usually in the closets. Do you agree with that?
I've heard it a lot too, and I would say that I think there was a research in 1993 which subjected 64 men who were homophobes to different kind of pornographic materials. So there was same-sex, men and women, men and men, and heterosexual, and they observed their erection or their sexual response. And they found out that the men who were homophobes responded more to same-sex. So perhaps it is, but usually, generally, irrational fear of something usually comes as a focus somewhere.
So no matter what, there is a measure of inner conflict or some inner issue that is being transferred or projected?
Usually there will be some anxieties which the person hasn't come to terms with. Generally, I mean, phobias generally. I mean, just using the first principle of just phobias. I mean, people have phobias for spider, for heights. If you begin to go into their past, there's probably something somewhere.
There's a trigger.
Yeah, there's something somewhere that maybe is in their unconscious or in their subconscious, which is the way they negotiate that conflict is by
creating this larger than life fear.
Yeah. So
now, Nigerians we're a very interesting nation of conflicts. So on one hand, we do not like to talk about sex. We don't like to be seen as sexual. On the other hand, we have an almost morbid fascination with sex itself, as evidenced by our Google searches and so on. Where does our fascination with same-sex relationships fall? What's that fascination, considering that we are either hiding about the fact that we like sex or we are appearing, on browsers in the middle of the night when nobody's watching?
Well, I'd always say that Nigeria is a very interesting country.
I agree.
Just looking at our Google searches in terms of sexual activities.
Yes.
X videos is one of the most visited websites, and it's a pornographic site. And even the kind of site, one of the most visited. If you check the Alexa rankings, the last time I checked, I think it was 7 or 8.
Just look at that.
Behind some other, but most importantly, it's important that in the first 10, you have a pornographic site amongst the most visited websites in Nigeria. And there's also that rumor that Nigerians actually do Google a lot of homosexual porn. So how do we? I don't know. I don't know how to reconcile that, but I'd like to say that as much as we as a country, we're diverse. We have 160 or 80 or 200 million people, depending on the census you want to use, and all these people having different, experiences, different. So it's not impossible to have that diversity in our experiences, but also to note that we as a people generally are interested in as much as
the forbidden.
Exactly. We are, more than anything else, Nigerians are, I would like to say maybe we are a bit hypocritical. We like to be seen in a certain light. We need to be seen we like to be seen in a certain light, and the other side we're doing, all kinds of stuff. So I think that's really why.
But there is that, even with that, this hypocrisy and this wanting to somehow sneakily explore the forbidden, it tends to diminish, again, homosexuality to being about the sexual act. So how much of our homophobia is based on ignorance? Do you feel, for instance, that if homosexual interactions and experiences become more mainstream, that we might start to see a more healthy reaction to people who are different?
I haven't actually thought about it in that light, but I'd say that in my experience, I find out that many Nigerians just don't even understand what it means to be an homosexual. And the moment, and what that means essentially is that we do not have empathy. You cannot imagine what it's like to be an homosexual. And generally, we are very much driven by culture, or what we say is culture, and religion. So growing up in Nigeria back in the 90s, I know that to an extent there was some level of tolerance amongst religion. Even my culture, Yoruba culture, is a very tolerant culture. Generally, it assimilates a lot of new things and all. So, but in recent times, I find out that the religions are less tolerant of, what is anybody's business with what two consenting adults do? And that is not the case now. So you have people talking about culture. But
even with our culture, Dami, and this is something that when you read about our culture has always made, and when I say our culture, I mean our different cultures has always made provision for unique sexual identities, unique gender identities, and then we woke up one day and all of a sudden...
I was going to add that, there's actually a certain masquerade that is only carried by certain same-sex in Yoruba.
Are you serious?
Yeah. I was reading. I was being told about that by a friend, and I've been trying to get the book in which.
Research.
Yeah, but if you look at our anthropological experiences, I mean, and that's really where we can couch some of these relationships. They exist, you know. But bottom line is, I mean, anybody on the street who's talking about their culture, what do they really know about their culture? Do they worship Ifa? Do they go to shrines? Do they, you understand? Do they do all this kind of? They don't. I mean, when we're talking about culture, and culture again is a very, very, very conscious and very fluid thing, because generally culture these days means cell phones. It means going to the mall. It means visiting the cinema. So exactly, what are we talking about when we say we're talking about culture? You know. So I generally just, I mean, I think it's just some level of ignorance. People just believe that they believe actually that it's a perversion. You know, I feel that's really one of the reasons at the core of their fear of it, that it's a perversion. You would see people who are not homosexuals would say that they would not want their children to watch films where they're same sex, because they don't want their children to be influenced or infected. So yes, there's also that belief of contagion about it, that okay, it's a contagious disease. If you are friends with an homosexual, maybe they would turn you.
If it was that easy, and it's a conversation we've had a couple of times on other episodes. We talk a lot about homophobia, and we talk about it within the context of the larger society. And I think perhaps we often don't consider that there is an effect on an LGBT person, perhaps, who is encountering homophobia. Do you have any experience with this?
Well, in my experience in the hospital, and in experience of mental illnesses generally, usually psychological and biological context usually inform people who break down with mental illness. So imagine a person who is an LGBT person who's coming to terms with his sexuality, and you know, along the line the parents or the family members are aware about it, and they begin, I mean, the homophobia doesn't even start from the society, it starts from the family. In which they are beating the person up. I've had cases of people who would tell me that men would rape them. I mean, because they're lesbians. They say they were trying to correct, they are trying to correct that tendency in them by raping them. You know, I mean, some of them would, because they've not come out, but this person is aware, would blackmail them and make them, you know, I've carnal knowledge of them because they do not, they don't want to come out yet. And the person is like, if you don't, I'll expose you. So, I mean, all this kind of, they're stress. They're all kind of, they're all types of stress that would eventually allow, you know, people to cave in, I mean, succumb to mental illness. So, yes, the effect of homophobia on the LGBT person himself is actually quite severe. So many times you have them come down to the hospital with depression, you know, anxieties, post-traumatic stress disorders,
which
stress
is something
reactions.
we don't yet want to acknowledge happens.
Oh, we don't, of course. I mean, we don't even acknowledge there's mental illness. I mean, generally,
this is true.
There's, you know, it's not as.
It's not
popular.
our culture.
It's not, you know, it's not our culture. Or people are doing you in the family. So these are the ways people negotiate mental illness. So how much more for someone who is LGBT? So many times you will have situations where, apart from the fact that these people have the illnesses, have a mental illness, the illnesses are maintained because the family throws them out into the streets. You know, there is sometimes there will be prejudice at work, stigma. You know, amongst people around them. I mean, so all these things add up together to make this cesspool of problems for this person who is trying to come to terms with his
Is it possible for a homosexual person to be homophobic?
Well, I think so. I think it's possible. Many times, in my own reading of the experiences of people who are homosexuals, or
because I feel like there'll be a lack of self-acceptance.
Yes, because no, the truth is there's the possibility. I mean, the answer is actually very easy. Is it possible to stigmatize oneself? Can one stigmatize himself? If you can stigmatize yourself, then it's also possible for you to be homophobic if you're an homosexual. So I agree with you. It's actually very possible, because the bottom line is, if you find out a situation that where you cannot express yourself, you know that if you come out, you would have repercussions. So you begin to, you know, Keep yourself. I mean, there have been accounts of LGBT people who do not come out of the closet until maybe they are in their 40s or in their 50s, and they've several times tried the heterosexual relationships.
Yes.
To no avail. I mean,
which is a big problem.
Yeah, many times they would begin to live their lives a lie. You know, they begin to live a lie and call it their lives because they are trying to conform into their expectations of their family, their society, and
which
the
again now links back
sect.
to the mental stress.
Exactly. So
it
brings the mental health issue. So it's almost like a kind of like a cyclical, a cyclical problem. It just keeps going on and causing more problems in its wake.
Now, many people, if you ask them if they were homophobes, they would deny it because many people don't see themselves as homophobic. If you were in a conversation with somebody, perhaps, and they were bringing across this viewpoint, what are some things you can share? Or even for a member of the LGBT community who is dealing with homophobia, what are some ways you can work with them to, even first, let's talk about that self-acceptance and that way of engaging with the larger society that doesn't always accept you?
That's a very thoughtful question. I'd say that, you would have to help as much as you can, help the person, the LGBT person, to come to terms with their own reality, come to terms with their own experiences, come to terms with their own biology, because essentially that is the way they are made. I mean, people who are homosexuals will tell you that they've always known that they were not like the others from when they were younger, so this is someone who has always known that there was something different about me. So how do you get this person to explore their difference? You have to come to that point.
Putting them in a place where they can't even accept themselves.
Exactly. So they have to come to that acceptance of themselves. And for the people who generally are ignorant or just generally living under the shroud of religion and culture, I think people should educate themselves generally. At the core of many of the problems that plague humanity is the lack of empathy. The moment you are able to empathize with somebody, the moment you're able to look at another man and put yourself in that person's shoes, the problems is half solved. Because once you're able to empathize, once I'm able to imagine what it's like to be something, essentially vicariously I'm that thing, and I'm able to understand the problems that person is going through. Yes. And as an individual, I'm more interested in not causing more problems to that person, but more interested in showing compassion and alleviating that person's problems. And that's the only way we as a society can begin to move forward.
Build that acceptance.
Yeah, so that I think at the core of everything is empathy, and also information. I mean, people need to be informed that this thing is not contagious first and foremost, because for you to even think it's contagious, maybe you actually have some doubts about your own sexuality. I mean, maybe you understand. So you begin to answer that. I mean,
and confront some
of your own, because sometimes even in confronting their own anxieties, they might be able to come to terms
with whatever it is that they're ignoring and that they're projecting on someone else.
Exactly. So I really think that's very important, because the truth about it is, first and foremost, Nigeria, are we a religious nation? Are we a secular nation? Are we supposed to say that, okay, because you are in a certain way, I have to condemn you? You understand? I mean, even the Christian Savior, Jesus Christ himself, was not, he doesn't condemn anybody. He welcomes everybody into the fold. So I generally don't understand where that hatred, that predatory, savage behavior is coming from. If you say it's coming from that religion, so let's fight it back to that religion. I mean, it says you love your neighbor, ask yourself, So I generally think that, information is very important. It's key, and also empathy. I mean,
I like that. I like that thought, that at the end, at the core of it, at the beginning, middle, and end of it, is empathy.
It's empathy.
That you are dealing with another human being, and you need to be able to put yourself in this person's shoes. And I think it's a great note for us to round up today's conversation. Thank you so much, Dami, for sharing your perspective, especially from the psychological angle. I don't think many people realize how damaging their beliefs and their actions to other people are. And I want to believe that there are people that will listen to you and realize that this thing I'm doing is not just a thought process, it's actually physically causing harm to another person. And that's the core of it. You know, even if many people will not accept that they are homophobic, for them the basis of their beliefs might be religious, it might be the society, it might be culture. But your actions are being carried out against another human being, and you're probably causing them a lot more harm than you think you are. For many people, negating homophobia means negating personal values, and that might be a difficult process for you. I'll encourage you to do some reading, have the hard conversations, talk with an LGBT person in your family or in your network, learn their experience, and do your best to put yourself in their shoes. Like Dami said, empathy. Once you can stand in another person's shoes and see the world from their angle, you will realize that the world itself is very different from what you think. Now, we'd really like you to join in this conversation with us on social media. So make sure you check us out on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube at Tears Nigeria. Join the conversation using the hashtag UntoldFacts2 and tell us your story. If you're somebody who has had to deal with homophobia, if you're still dealing with it, if you've been able to find some acceptance, share some information that might help someone else. And if you're somebody that wants to know, okay, what do I need to know? Where can I go to learn a little bit? Trust me, it's a conversation that will always be worth it. My name is Ari Topo. Thank you so much for watching Untold Facts.